Picture this. You are standing on the conning tower of a German U-boat. It's deep in the North Atlantic, maybe 2 a.m. Pitch black, absolutely no moon, March 1943. The sea's running high, the boat's riding low, and you, the captain, supremely confident. You're the unseen predator. You can just make out the dark shapes of the Allied convoy ahead. Big, slow ships. They can't see you. They never do. Not in the dark. Torpedoes ready. You're the attack position, running surface to get ahead of the escorts. The hunt is on, just following that long shadow. And then, well, something impossible happens. Out of that completely black sky, just void, a blinding pillar of light snaps on, right on your boat. Before you can even yell, crash dive, you hear an aircraft engine roaring overhead. The whole world just dissolves into this thunderous chaos of depth charges. How did they find you? Visual detection, totally impossible. What was it that let the Allies just pierce that darkness? The darkness that had been the U-boat's best friend for, what, 3 terrifying years? This wasn't luck. It wasn't some miracle. It's the story of how the Battle of the Atlantic, the longest, costliest fight of World War II, was really won. Not by a battleship, not really by a bomber, but by this tiny, top-secret bit of technology, working a very specific wavelength.
Yeah, that moment you described, that sudden shock, the roles just instantly reverse. That really is the technological pivot point of the war at sea. For years, U-boats owned the night. They used the vastness, the darkness, and suddenly none of that mattered. The hunter was the hunted. And the shift, it happened incredibly fast, just a matter of months. All thanks to a scientific breakthrough, the Germans, well, they just never saw it coming.
Okay, let's really unpack this. This is crucial stuff. Our mission for this deep dive is to trace that story. We want to see how these German U-boat crews went from being the Atlantic's most feared predators, almost celebrities really, to basically hunted prey by the spring of 43. And we're going to explore the role of centimetric radar. This tiny bit of science that didn't just win a battle, it arguably enabled the whole Allied war effort. Right, so to really get how big a deal this Allied tech counterpunch was, you first need to grasp the absolute crisis they were in. Let's rewind a bit, back to 1940. Germany unleashes the U-Bootwaffe, the U-boat weapon. And it wasn't just destructive, it was genuinely existential for Britain.
Absolutely, and it wasn't just about having lots of submarines, it was the strategy behind it. Admiral Karl Dönitz, the U-boat chief, he figured out pretty quickly that lone wolf attacks weren't cutting it. So he brought in Rudeltaktik, the famous wolf-pack tactics. The whole idea was to just overwhelm the convoy escorts. Strength in numbers.
And that coordinated approach was key, right?
Yeah.
Explain how the wolf pack worked, because it really depended on communication and that crucial advantage of darkness.
Sure. It was basically a synchronized ambush. So one U-boat, maybe patrolling way out on the flank, spots a convoy, usually during the day. That boat then radios back to HQ U-boat command, or BDU with all the details. Position, speed, course, what have you. Then Dönitz, back in France, would vector every available U-boat in that area, could be 8, could be 20, to converge on that spot for a mass attack.
And these attacks, when did they usually happen?
Almost always at night. The whole strategy was built around hitting the convoy from multiple directions all at once in the dead of night. The Allied escorts, they were pretty thin on the ground in those early years. They just couldn't defend everywhere at once against threats coming from all sides, some submerged, some surface. It was a tactical nightmare for them.
And this period, this is what the Germans called die Glückliche Zeit, the happy time. Said with some satisfaction, I imagine.
Oh, immense satisfaction. It roughly runs from June 1940 to maybe February 41. And it truly was a golden age for the U-boat crews. The Allied losses were just staggering, not just in ships, but psychologically too. In 1940 alone, U-boats sank over 2.5 million tons of Allied shipping. Think about it, that's over 1,000 merchant ships, carrying everything, food, fuel, war materials, planes.
And the German commanders, they became genuine national heroes, didn't they? Like beyond just military figures.
Oh, absolutely. They were the rock stars of the Third Reich, the visible winners. You had commanders like Otto Kretschmer, they called him the Silent Otto, just incredibly efficient. Sank 47 ships, something like 270,000 tons himself. And Günther Prien, of course, famous for sneaking into Scapa Flow and sinking the battleship HMS Royal Oak right at anchor. German propaganda absolutely loved these guys. They seemed invincible.
But that invincibility, that whole strategy, it all hinged on one thing: the advantage of darkness. And we need to be clear about how these U-boats actually operated.
It's vital, yeah.
Yeah.
WWII U-boats, they weren't true submarines like we think of today, like nuclear boats. They were really submersible torpedo boats. They spent most of their time on the surface. Two big reasons for that. One, they were much faster surface, maybe 17, 18 knots compared to 7 or 8 submerged. Two, they had to run their big diesel engines on the surface to recharge the huge batteries they needed for running underwater.
So surfaced running was essential for chasing convoys and just keeping the lights on, basically. And at night, surfaced, they had this near-perfect camouflage.
Exactly. A U-boat's conning tower, it doesn't stick up very far. In the North Atlantic, with those choppy, dark seas, especially on a moonless night, practically invisible to the naked eye, even pretty close up. Allied lookouts, bless them, they'd be straining their eyes against this constant movement of waves. It was exhausting and mostly futile.
And trying to use searchlights, that was just counterproductive.
Hugely risky for very little gain. If an escort did somehow spot a U-boat close by, maybe acoustically, switching on a searchlight just screamed, "We see you!"
The U-boat commander gets an instant warning, hits the crash dive button, and the light just ends up illuminating empty ocean. We even have accounts of U-boat commanders mocking the convoys over the radio. They were that confident about slipping in and out unseen in the dark. The night was absolutely their kingdom. And this advantage created a crisis for the Allies that, well, it's hard to overstate just how bad it was. This wasn't just losing ships. It threatened the entire war effort.
Totally. The U-boats were literally strangling Britain's lifeline. Britain needed to import almost everything: food, oil, raw materials for factories. When you start losing millions of tons of shipping, that means harsher rationing, factories slowing down, fuel reserves dwindling. It was getting desperate.
And the numbers just got worse. 1942 was the absolute nadir, the peak of the crisis.
Oh, 1942 was horrific. Over 6 million tons of shipping sunk, more than 1,100 vessels gone. The terrifying maths was that ships were being sunk much faster than the Allies, even with the huge industrial power of the UK and the US combined, could build replacements. They were losing the tonnage war, simple as that.
Churchill himself captured the sheer dread of it, didn't he? He later said the U-boat threat was the only thing that really frightened him during the war.
It's such a telling quote. Not the Blitz, not the threat of invasion in 1940. It was the U-boats potentially starving Britain into submission. If that Atlantic lifeline was cut, Britain was out of the war. And forget about any future invasion of Europe. You couldn't possibly build up the men and material needed for something like D-Day without secure sea lanes. They had to find a way to fight back in the dark, or the war was lost.
Okay, so the need was crystal clear. Find a way to see at night. Detect that low metal hull against the chaos of the ocean. Now, they had radar. It had been crucial in Battle of Britain in '40. But like we said, spotting a big bomber high up is one thing. Spotting a tiny U-boat conning tower bobbing in the waves, that's a whole different ballgame.
It was a massive challenge, yeah. The radar they had back then, like Britain's chain home system, it used really long wavelength, measured in meters, great for big targets like planes, gave a nice clean reflection. But against a small U-boat conning tower, constantly swamped by waves, those long waves just scattered. They reflected off the waves themselves just as much as the sub. It created this mess engineers called sea clutter. The U-boat signal just got lost in all that noise.
So it wasn't just about making the radar smaller. It was about the frequency itself, finding one that could actually pick out metal from water.
Exactly. And the existing radar sets were huge, heavy things, totally impractical for sticking on a patrol plane that needed to fly for hours and hours over the ocean. You needed something small, light, powerful, and crucially, operating on a completely different wavelength. And this is where the cabin magnetron comes in, the miracle invention.
University of Birmingham, February 1940, two scientists, John Randall and Harry Boot, working kind of under the radar, ironically, and they deliver the key.
It's such a classic story of game-changing innovation. Randall and Boot created this device. Well, using magnets and resonant cavities, it could blast out incredibly powerful pulses of microwave frequency radio waves. And critically, it did this in a package that was small, light, and tough enough to actually be put inside an aircraft. Previous radar-generating tubes were these big, fragile, inefficient glass things. The magnetron just rewrote the rule book.
And the microwave frequency, specifically that 10-centimeter wavelength, why was that so critical? Let's get into the science a bit here, because this is really the heart of it.
We have to. That 10-centimeter wavelength, that's what defines centimetric radar. Think of it like this. The longer the radio wave, like those meter waves from the old radar, the fuzzier the picture it paints, and the harder it is to tell two close objects apart. Long waves couldn't really distinguish a small conning tower from a nearby wave crest. But using the much shorter 10-centimeter waves, the radar beam was much narrower, much more focused.
Okay, so shorter waves meant higher resolution, like going from a blurry photo to a sharp one.
Precisely. That better resolution meant the radar could, sort of, punch through the sea spray and, most importantly, ignore that confusing sea clutter. The signal bouncing back from a solid metal U-boat hull stood out clearly against the background noise of the waves. Plus, the short wavelength meant they could use a much smaller antenna dish, which was essential if you wanted to fit it into the nose of a plane like a Liberator bomber flying for coastal command.
And what's amazing is how quickly the Allies geared up to use this. It wasn't just the invention, it was the whole industrial and organizational effort behind it.
Oh, absolutely crucial. The British knew they couldn't mass produce it fast enough on their own, especially during the Blitz. So in late 1940, they sent the technology, literally, one Magnetron locked in a box, over to the U.S. as part of the Tizard mission, probably the single most important technology transfer of the entire war. The Americans set up the MIT Radiation Laboratory, the famous RAD lab, almost entirely dedicated to perfecting and mass-producing this centimetric radar tech for warfare.
While the Germans, meanwhile,
Yeah.
they dropped the ball on the intelligence front, didn't they?
Massively. They knew centimetric radar was theoretically possible, sure, but they concluded it was practically impossible to build reliably, in combat-ready form, for years. They just completely underestimated the sheer industrial power and scientific focus. The Allies, especially the U.S., were throwing at this one single problem. They thought they had breathing room. They didn't.
The Allies still faced hurdles, obviously making it work reliably in brutal Atlantic weather, getting the accuracy right, but they pushed through. Early systems, like ASV Mark II, were okay, but not great. Then came the real killer app, ASV Mark III, with the Magnetron inside.
The Mark III. That was the system that broke the U-boats. Because of the Magnetron's power and that 10-centimeter resolution, it could reliably spot a surfaced U-boat up to 15 miles away. 15 miles, that was huge. It gave the aircraft crew enough time to approach carefully, staying high up, out of sight and sound of the lookouts on the U-boat.
And the radar was just one half of this deadly combination. The other piece was the lee light.
Right. This was the tactical genius that made the radar so lethal. The radar guided the plane silently, unseen, through the pitch-black night, homing in on the U-boat, down to maybe 2 miles away. The plane stayed fairly high during this approach, maybe a few thousand feet, so the U-boat crew wouldn't hear the engines or see it.
So the U-boat's just sailing along, charging batteries, completely oblivious. What happens next?
At about 2 miles out, the pilot starts a steep, fast dive, still guided by the radar operator. Then, only at the last moment, maybe 500 feet altitude, they switch on the lee light. This incredibly powerful downward-pointing searchlight, 24 million candle power. By the time the German lookouts are blinded by this sudden glare, it's already way too late to dive effectively.
And protecting this breakthrough was paramount. The Allies went to incredible lengths with secrecy and deception. That was just as vital as the tech itself.
Oh, totally. It bought them maybe 6 to 8 crucial months of almost total tactical surprise. If the Germans had known early on it was 10-centimeter radar, they would have rushed to develop detectors. Instead, the Allies ran this brilliant disinformation campaign. They fed stories to capture U-boat crews, used double agents.
The stories were pretty wild, weren't they? Things like Allied pilots having super night vision from eating tons of carrots or using powerful new infrared detectors.
Exactly. Fantastical stuff. But the Germans believed it, or at least were confused enough by it, because the attacks were so precise and happened in conditions where they thought they were totally safe. They couldn't explain it otherwise. This confusion bought the Allies vital time. The Germans chased ghosts, developing countermeasures for threats that didn't exist, while Allied planes were fitting the real weapon and getting better at using it every night.
Okay, so the tech is rolling out, the deception's working. But initially, the German High Command, BDU, they were reluctant to believe their own commander's reports, right? They kind of dismissed these stories of impossible night attacks.
Yeah. Initially, there was denial, maybe blaming commanders for negligence or even cowardice. It was hard for them to accept that their seemingly invulnerable night tactics were suddenly failing so badly. But the losses kept mounting. They had to figure something out. German scientists worked out correctly that the older Allied radar, the ASV Mark II, the meter wave stuff was detectable. This led them to develop the Meatox receiver, basically a simple box that would beep if it picked up those longer radar waves. Gave the U-boat maybe 60 seconds warning to crash dive.
And for a little while, in late 42, MEDOX actually helped. It gave them back a bit of warning.
It did offer some temporary relief, yes. But this is just a classic case of the technology race. You develop a countermeasure, but the other side is already working on the next step. And the fatal flaw, the absolutely catastrophic flaw with MEDOX, was that it was designed only to detect those long meter wavelengths of the old ASV Mark II. It was completely, utterly deaf to the new, short 10-centimeter wavelength signals from the ASV Mark III.
Wow. So the German crews are sailing along, feeling safe because their MEDOX isn't making a sound, thinking the night is still their shield. And they're totally exposed.
Completely exposed. The warning system stayed silent right up until the ley light flicked on, usually far too late. This silence just caused chaos and desperation among the crews. They were sinking without any warning, without any explanation. It got so bad, some submariners actually started believing the MEDOX set itself was somehow betraying them, maybe malfunctioning and transmitting their position. They just couldn't grasp that the Allies had jumped to a frequency their gear couldn't even hear.
This gap in technology, coupled with the psychological impact, it really sets the stage for the absolute turning point. May 1943, known forever as Black May.
Yeah, catastrophic barely covers it for the U-boat arm. The numbers are just stark. 41 U-boats destroyed in one single month. Think about that, more than one a day, every day for the entire month. At that time, the Germans probably had about 120 U-boats operational in the Atlantic. So in May alone, they lost about 25%, a quarter of their entire active frontline strength.
That's just unsustainable. There's no way they could recover from losses like that.
No. The U-boat arm was effectively broken in May 1943. They never regained the initiative in the Atlantic. It was a decisive defeat. The combination of these radar-equipped aircraft, working together now with new escort carriers providing air cover deep in the Atlantic, and dedicated hunter-killer groups, it just created an environment where U-boats couldn't operate safely. Their nighttime sanctuary was gone. Every time they had to surface, which they had to do to run diesels and charge batteries, they risked instant, unseen annihilation.
Let's walk through what a typical attack looked like in that terrible month. Paint the picture. Say, a Coastal Command Liberator, long-range bomber, out on patrol, 2 a.m.
Okay, so the Lib is probably cruising high, maybe 4,000, 5,000 feet, well above where the U-boat lookouts might spot or hear it. Inside, the radar operator's glued to his scope, the ASV Mark III display. Suddenly, a sharp, clear blip appears against the faint sea clutter. Contact, bearing 045, range 15 miles, he calls out.
Instantly, the pilot starts turning. The crew gets ready. Depth charges armed, set for a shallow detonation. The plane begins a controlled descent, but still staying hidden, while the radar operator keeps feeding corrections. Range 10 miles, steady. Range 6 miles, still holding. Down below the U-boat captain. Probably no idea. Focused on his watch, the sea ahead, maybe supervising the battery charging.
Right. The plane drops faster now, maybe below 1,000 feet. Target's only 2 miles out.
The radar's so good, the pilot knows exactly where that U-boat is relative to him. And crucially, down on the U-boat bridge, still nothing. MEDOX is silent. Lookouts see only black waves and spray. Then a moment of truth. Half mile out, maybe less. Pilot flips the switch, lee light comes on, bam. That dark shade on the water is suddenly caught in this intense, blinding glare. Must have been terrifying for the guys on the bridge.
Utter paralyzing horror. They'd scream the alarm, "Alarm! Tafkin, dive! Dive!" But the physics are brutal. A U-boat needed, best case 30 seconds, maybe more like 45, to get fully under and safe. The aircraft, diving at maybe 200 knots, it's overhead in less than 20 seconds. Releases its stick of depth charges, set shallow, maybe 25 feet.
And the U-boat is still on the way down, not deep enough, when those charges go off right underneath it.
Exactly. The underwater explosion creates this massive hydraulic shockwave, concentrated pressure. It doesn't need a direct hit. It just crushes the pressure hull, breaks pipes, disables steering, floods compartments, often the engine room first. Survival chances, very, very slim. And the psychological impact of this invisible hunter, it was devastating. These crew, they'd gone from being the celebrated elite, the heroes of the happy time, to feeling like, well, like cannon fodder. They lost their shield, the darkness. Every time they surfaced, they just felt utterly exposed.
Morale just collapsed. That's when they started calling their boats Eisenserge iron coffins.
It was grim. By 1943, the overall casualty rate for U-boat crews hit 75%. 75%. Imagine being a young sailor heading out on patrol, knowing that 3 out of 4 of your friends, your comrades, weren't coming back. The old confidence, the bravado, gone. Replaced by this gnawing fear of an aircraft that could see you when you were effectively blind and helpless.
And this absolute dominance by Allied technology, it forced Dönitz's hand. May 24th, 1943. He makes the call, pulls the U-boats out of the main North Atlantic convoy routes, essentially conceding defeat in the most vital theater.
His own words after the war are maybe the starkest assessment. He said, quite plainly, "We had lost the Battle of the Atlantic. The enemy's superiority in the field of science had completely turned the tables against us." He didn't blame his crews or tactics, he blamed the science gap.
And the attempts they made to fight back directly, like adding more anti-aircraft guns to the U-boats, that just made things worse, didn't it?
It was a desperate measure, and yeah, largely counterproductive. Putting more flak guns on deck just meant the U-boat had to stay surfaced longer to try and fight it out. But trying to shoot down a fast-moving, heavily armed Liberator with deck guns while you're pitching around in the Atlantic, it was almost suicide. Their best defense was still to dive. But the radar and the ley-light combo just stole the time they needed. The Allied tech had moved too fast, too far ahead.
So the U-boats are effectively defeated in the North Atlantic by mid-1943. The immediate strategic consequences were just enormous. They really shaped the rest of the war.
Absolutely. First and foremost, the lifeline was secure. Food, fuel, weapons, troops, oil, especially oil, could flow from North America to Britain reliably without those crippling losses. Britain wasn't going to be starved out. The factories could keep running full tilt.
And crucially, this directly enabled D-Day, the invasion of Normandy in 1944. You just can't mount an operation that massive without controlling the sea lanes.
No way. D-Day needed millions of tons of supplies, countless vehicles, fuel, hundreds of thousands of soldiers moved across the channel. If U-boats had still been operating like they were in 42, sinking ships left, right, and center, that buildup would have been completely impossible. Beating the U-boats was step one for invading Europe.
And beyond just saving the supplies, winning this battle freed up huge amounts of Allied resources, didn't it?
Immense resources. All those long-range patrol aircraft, the escort destroyers, the corvettes, the personnel tied up just hunting submarines, they could now be reassigned. This meant the strategic bombing campaign against Germany could intensify dramatically. More planes, more crews available. Convoys supplying the Soviet Union via the Arctic route also faced much less threat. It shifted the whole global balance of military power in the Allies' favor.
And the technology itself, centimetric radar, it didn't just stay in the anti-submarine role. It spread like wildfire, revolutionizing combat everywhere.
Oh, completely. The lessons learned hunting U-boats were applied immediately. Surface warships got advanced radar sets very quickly. That whole era of battleships slugging it out within visual range, pretty much over. Radar-directed gunnery meant ships could accurately target enemies miles away, way beyond the horizon, even in fog or darkness.
And in the air war, massive impact there too.
Huge. The cavity magnetron was the heart of the H-2S radar used by British bombers. This let them see the ground through clouds, navigate accurately, and identify bombing targets even when visibility was zero. A massive boost for the strategic bombing offensive. And night fighters got airborne intercept radar, AI radar, a direct descendant of the ASV tech, allowed them to hunt and shoot down enemy bombers effectively in total darkness.
It's also fascinating how this kicked off a really intense scientific arms race. The Germans realized they were behind and started scrambling to catch up, not just with their own radar, but with counter-radar tech.
It became relentless. You see the Germans rushing to develop electronic jammers, radar warning receivers that could detect the new frequencies. And really interestingly, they started experimenting with radar-absorbent coatings for submarine snorkels, trying to make them less visible to radar. This is literally the birth of stealth technology, driven purely by the need to hide from Allied centimetric radar. And the Allies kept improving to better signal processing, ways to hop frequencies, filtering out jamming. It was constant innovation on both sides.
But maybe the most amazing part, for us looking back, is the legacy in civilian life. This top-secret military tech from 1943 is now just everywhere.
It really is pervasive. That little cavity magnetron, the high-power microwave generator that helped win the war, it's the direct ancestor of so many things we take for granted. High-resolution air traffic control radar, a sophisticated weather radar, that too. Medical imaging systems like MRI, uses related principles, satellite communications, television broadcasting, and of course the most direct descendant, the microwave oven in your kitchen.
Right. That heating effect of microwaves was noticed in the radar labs. They basically weaponized microwaves to defeat the U-boats and then domesticated them to heat up leftovers. It's kind of incredible. That wartime investment laid the groundwork for so much of our modern wireless world.
Oh.
But before we wrap up, we absolutely have to pause and remember the human cost here. This wasn't just about technology.
It's essential. We talk about strategy and tech, but real people fought and died in this battle. Over 30,000 German submariners were killed. That's a 70% casualty rate. Astounding. Many were just teenagers, young men trapped in those iron coffins.
And on the Allied side, the merchant sailors paid a terrible price too. Over 30,000 civilian mariners lost their lives bringing those vital supplies across, drowned, frozen, killed by torpedoes. The victory secured by radar was paid for in blood on both sides. So if we try to boil down the core lessons from this deep dive, what really stands out from the story of U-boats and radar?
I think the biggest one is just the sheer speed at which technology can change warfare. U-boats dominated the night in 1940, 41, 42. By mid-43, that dominance was completely shattered, almost overnight, thanks to one invention. Second, the payoff from sustained scientific investment. The Allies bet big on the magnetron and radar research, and critically, they had the industrial and organizational might to turn a lab discovery into a mass-produced weapon incredibly quickly. That's something the Germans underestimated.
And maybe also that military doctrine needs to adapt. The wolf pack was brilliant, until radar made its core assumption, invisibility, obsolete. Then it became a death trap. And finally, secrecy. Hiding the existence and capability of the 10-centimeter radar bought the Allies that absolutely critical window of time to deploy it and achieve decisive results before the Germans could effectively counter it. Hashtag #outro. So let's come back to where we started. That supremely confident U-boat captain in the dark Atlantic night. By May 1943, assuming he even survived that long, he wasn't confident anymore. He was likely a nervous wreck, dreading every single time he had to surface. The bravado, gone, replaced by the constant fear of that invisible electronic eye and the sudden blinding light that meant death was seconds away. The darkness wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was filled with unseen hunters.
Exactly. Look, the Battle of the Atlantic was complex. Many things contributed to the Allied victory, breaking the Enigma codes, building more escorts, new tactics like support groups, the sheer industrial output. But centimetric radar, powered by the cavity magnetron, was arguably the key enabler, the force multiplier. It fundamentally took away the U-boat's primary defense, hiding. It allowed all the other Allied advantages to come fully into play.
It's just such a powerful example, isn't it? That wars aren't just won by courage or numbers or even tactics alone. Sometimes they're won by breakthroughs in science, by innovation, by fundamentally understanding and exploiting the physics of the world around us, like understanding wavelengths.
So here's maybe a final thought for you to consider. That scientific edge, the ability to see something small and specific against a noisy background. The metal hull against the sea clutter, defined by that 10-centimeter wavelength that was the difference between victory and defeat in the Atlantic. And that same principle, finding the signal in the noise, leveraging a specific technological advantage, that's still what defines power today, whether it's military, economic, or informational. The war was decided in large part by physics. And maybe think about that next time you use your microwave. That same disruptive power is sitting right there on your countertop.